Hello, everyone. I'm Linda Schlossman, and this is the UC San Diego Learning Boost series. This is season 1, episode 9, recorded on May 25th, 2022. The Learning Boost series is a UC San Diego virtual series of talks introducing you to leaders, dreamers, innovators, and change champions. This virtual series is designed to inspire you with ideas that matter to you and your role, one talk at a time. Today's talk is A Little Change Management Goes a Long Way with our champion for change management, Lynn Underwood. And I want to thank everyone for joining us live today. We really appreciate having you here. We love your engagement. It's energizing and exciting to see all of you and to hear from you. So we ask that you connect with us via chat and pose your questions and comments there throughout the talk. At the end, we'll ask our speaker as many as possible during the Q&A. Now, if you're watching the recorded version on YouTube and you like what you see and you want some more, then please click on the like button and subscribe to the channel. Now it's time to formally introduce you to our featured speaker, Lynn Underwood. Lynn is the Director for Strategic Organizational Change Management for the UC San Diego Enterprise Systems Renewal, which is also known as ESR. In this role, Lynn provides the overarching enterprise change management framework for all ESR programs and projects. And she gets to apply her breadth of experience as an artist and art lover and her certifications as a project manager, Lean Six Sigma Black Belt, process design engineer, and ProSci change management practitioner and trainer. Prior to UC San Diego, Lynn worked primarily for nonprofits, including directing integrated information for Global Guggenheim in New York City. Lynn's ability to keenly focus on people in the midst of change, how people work, how people communicate, and how programs and services work for you has been a key theme across her professional career. I'm also proud to say that I've been fortunate enough to co-facilitate change management workshops with Lynn. And besides being an expert in what she teaches, I find her to be pure joy and positivity. We are very, very fortunate to feature Lynn, our champion for change management, for today's Learning Boost series. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you, Linda. I really appreciate that intro, and I agree. I was so happy, and I learned a lot from you in our training of change management. I'm happy to be here, and I appreciate the invitation to meet with everyone today. Due to technology, I'm on the phone, so I apologize to anyone in the audience. I'd like to get started. So if we can start with the next slide, the focus today, and there are some animations, so just feel free to click through. The focus today is that change is inevitable. It is constant, and that's something that years ago wouldn't need to would say, and people would think about it, but I'm sure everybody is understanding how much change is happening and how quickly today. So what is it we can do about it? How can we be better at change? And that's the focus of what I want to share is we're going to learn the basics of change management. It's a real thing. And how there are some simple tools or simple things to keep in mind, whether you're leading change or experiencing it, and how you can incorporate it into your work and your response to change. So what I'd like us to be able to do is to take action to manage change as leaders of change and people experiencing change after this presentation. The agenda is, like I said, we're going to look a little bit into what change management is and change itself, and then the simple steps to do with understanding change, planning for it, managing it, and sustaining it. So the slide after agenda is called change. And the next slide after that is, so what is change? The next slide is, change is, it's an alteration, a transformation. It takes you from a current state to a future state. And the graphic I'm showing on the screen here, hopefully, is current state, and then an arrow over to transformation to a future state. Change, what's important here, and you'll hear me say this several times throughout the presentation, is change is to be expected. We need to plan for it. Even if it's sudden, we need to know and be thinking, maybe you're having emergency preparedness plans. That doesn't mean you'll know when an emergency would happen, but in some way you're planning to be prepared for change. The focus of this conversation today is focused on change at work. So we should be planning for it, and hopefully you're never surprised by it. While I speak about change, then on the next slide, I'd like you to think about a change you've experienced. Most people are going through hundreds of changes at one time, very small things, to, major changes happening at work. But when you think about a specific change, because that could anchor you into how you might ask some questions in the chat and afterwards, is what was your reaction when you learned about the change? And did anything change your mind about the change? So did you think one thing and something revealed itself, or something happened and made you actually change your mind about what you thought about the change? Also, when you experience change and you led change, what are some things that worked and didn't work, right? And there's always something that might have made a difference even more. And why I'd like to ask this question of what would have made a difference is change management's never done just once or just one way. There's always a room to have improved and to have found another way. So we're not shooting for perfection here. We're aiming to try to do as much preparedness for change as possible and getting people ready. So there's always some way we could have made a difference, and to learn from those experiences. The next slide is called Organizational Change Management. So Linda, if you're moving through the slides for me, go ahead and reveal the changes as we go. But change management is comprised of I want you to go away with three high-level concepts. It's a deliberate practice, and there's different methodologies to support that practice. It's also focused on people. So I don't know if those of you running projects and programs and services and process improvements, you all are always thinking or should be thinking about the people involved in your work. But the interesting thing about organizational change management is it is focused 100% on the people. And with that in mind, it means it needs to be integrated into work. Change management on its own really doesn't exist. It needs to support some other effort. Maybe you're looking at the culture of an organization. The culture is the thing that you're potentially looking to change, and the actions you'd take that are people focused around that would be the change management and support of it. I hope that makes sense. There's some OCM assumptions that people make. I apologize for all the animations here, but the first one is soft skills are easy, and they're not. They're actually really some of the harder things to do. And in a way, people often cut corners with change management a little bit or make assumptions about it, which is why the title of the slide is because it's a little uncomfortable sometimes holding difficult conversations or bringing forth, as the next one is, OCM is warm and fuzzy. The answer is not, it's not always good news. People's jobs may be changing in a direction they don't like. They might be doing one thing now and incorporating more of something they're not inclined to with the change. So it's not always good news, right? I often hear on the next one, policy is, or the stick, like there's always a carrot and a stick. Policy, you don't need OCM because it's policy. Nobody has a choice. Wrong, there's always a way to find what's in it for me, meaning a motivator for individuals to adopt a change. And that's even true with policy. If I were a faculty member and there was a policy coming down where I had to do some entry into some systems, and the motivator there would be, well, I need to do it for policy because I need to stay in good standing. And if I don't do this in the system, I will fall out of good standing, endangering my status with the university. So the what's in it for me isn't always a game show prize necessarily, but it is a strong motivator for people to go along with the change. And the point here with the policy is you shouldn't not conduct OCM. People need to still know about it, know why they need to do it, be prepared, and be able to succeed with that change. The next one is, assumption is you must be positive with OCM. I agree, as long as you're truthful and honest. What you're doing is being very respectful for people who are about to undergo change. And so however you can best do that, if being positive means you're not being truthful about the change and how it'll impact them, that will not work. And it's a disservice for the people undergoing the change and your relationship and engagement with those folks. Another thing I hear, people say this a lot, the next one is don't say what you don't know, right? If you don't have an answer for something, you don't want to get out there in front of people and say, I don't know. Well, I don't agree. That's the assumption with people have is they need to always be as prepared as possible. You need to be prepared, but usually you're going to need to say that you'll share when you know, when you have more information, or I'll look into it, or I don't know. It's that being truthful and honest that I referenced in the item before, which makes it very important for people to be able to hear what you have to say and understand the change before them. It's another way of treating people respectfully. Let's just get the word out. That's not true. The answer to that is the messenger or the sender of the message, or who you learn about the change from really does matter, and so does the timing. I always go back, and I'll say this probably several times during the presentation, is that an employee and a manager should never learn at the same time about a change that very much impacts the employee. Because what will happen is the employee will look at their manager and say, how come you didn't tell me? And the manager will be just as surprised. That's far worse way. So the timing really matters, and who it's delivered by. OCM is just communications and training, and the answer to that is they're important. They're very, very important. But basically, how you conduct OCM, how you think about people with change and plan for their change, and then also communicate with them and engage them. And if training's needed, train them appropriately, and then prepare them for that actual change and afterwards. That really encompasses what OCM should be about. The next slide. What to expect with change. There's three main components with this. I like to put this out there, is that you can always expect resistance, that it's an individual journey or process, and people are very connected to what's in it for me, the with them, and that you should expect to engage with people in order to conduct OCM. Those might sound obvious, so let's dig into each one a little bit more. In the next slide, resistance. Resistance will happen. You need to plan for it. Just like change will happen, and as much as you can plan for it. The engaging with people is how you really understand what the resistance is, but there are some assumptions you might be able to make. Another thing about resistance is you can share what you know now, but you got to make sure you follow up. If you just say, oh, we don't know now, we'll let you know, and you don't follow up, that's breaking that engagement with people. You put your word out there, you need to follow up. And if, let's say, you're hearing rumors, and rumors are getting back to you, people's perception of the change is different from your change you're leading, you need to actually speak to that change. You need to go out and say, hey, we've been hearing this, but this is not what's changing, this other thing is. And so you need to speak to that. More importantly, resistance will not go away. You need to involve the right people to address it. And why it's the right people, maybe it's bringing in leadership because of what you're hearing about people's concerns about change. Maybe they need to hear from leaders. Maybe it's managers or other specific people in roles that need to talk to other groups of people to convey in the language that's familiar to them what the change is. So you're leveraging other people. And resistance also, there's an opportunity to reinforce. So one more thing about resistance. I often hear people say, there's no resistance to this, everybody wants this. Resistance can be caused by people's reaction to change. So maybe it's organizational performance. So possibly the person who said, everybody wants this, they might be true. Everybody does want that. But if the organization conducting the change doesn't have a good track record, people might be resisting it because they'll think because of past experience. Maybe the change was extra hard because some things weren't conducted by the organization. So don't assume that people are just resisting the change. They might be resisting to how it might be conducted or other aspects of the change. So be aware of that. Individual journey is the next slide. We change organizations one person at a time. And that means that as an individual, understand when you're experiencing change, it will be a decision you make whether to go along with the change. So try to understand the change as much as possible. We want leaders to share the business reason for change. And like I said earlier, managers should share with their employees the change impact that will be for them personally. Also, again, I said in the previous slide, you want to leverage others. You aren't implementing a change just for people, but you're changing with people. So influential people are very critical to the success of the change. You need to make sure everybody understands the change, but if there are people who are very influential that understand the change and its meaning and can help convey that message to your audiences, that's very important. And engage with people, the next one. You need to take time for people. You need to listen and make sure you maintain and sustain connections. If I don't say anything else other than this on this slide. It's very important. And the way you're listening is you need to always offer feedback opportunities and ways to solicit feedback and follow up with groups. So the next slide is steps you can take. I want to make sure I have enough time. So one, you want to understand the change. Most important here is usually never just one change. Let's say you're aiming to implement a new system where there'll be a lot of changes along the way to get to implementing that change. And also realize that your knowledge of the change, you can't wait until you know the change in totality, because it'll almost be upon you by that point. But expect your knowledge of the change to evolve. And that goes back to what I said earlier. You need to be able to say, hey, here's what we know now, and we'll let you know if this changes or how it might change, or what we know as we move forward with a project. And you definitely want to focus on people and how the change, as you understand it, impacts individuals. I'll make sure that there's a couple of tools. I have them ready to provide to Linda. There's a change story and an audience definition list. There's a couple of tools that can be provided afterwards. Change expectations here, I have them front and center on each of the 4 slides I have. Remember, resistance will happen. Individuals need to make decisions to join change, and you engage people. A change story is the combination of understanding what you know about the change now and making sure you put it into a language that makes sense for the people who are affected, and continually evolving that. You do that alongside something which defines, in the next slide, tells you about people and the audience. So who's impacted? How are they impacted by this change? And what do you know about these people? And once you identify that, you want to dig a little deeper. Is there any known resistance for this group? Do you know what's in it for them? Are there engagement and reinforcement activities that you can identify? And I'm going to go to the next slide, and I'm going to talk through a story that makes this come to life. I worked somewhere where one day I had several offices, and one of the offices I worked at in New York, they said, we're no longer going to have a receptionist in the lobby, but there will be a reception desk. So the change, as I'm showing here, is there'll be no receptionist. But that also meant there were some other changes. Remember, I said there's never just one change. That meant for everybody who worked in that office that the mail and deliveries from the prior day aren't sorted until 7 to 8 a.m. the next day. It also meant, and for various reasons, there was a library on that floor that they weren't going to lock the floor down, and so there could be security risks and mistaken and uninvited visitors. So who are the audiences for this? On one level, you might say, well, it's the organization, right? Oh, and sorry, there's phone calls go to a change, so phones won't be answered directly. So, but think of your audiences. There's the mail delivery, there's messenger delivery, there's visitors coming, invited guests, there's telephone calls. Another audience is all staff. More audience is the people who work on that floor. And really important, the last audience I want to emphasize are the people who sit closest to the unstaffed receptionist desk. So this hopefully helps you understand that there's more than one change when we say, hey, we're not going to have a receptionist anymore, and there's more than one audience. So in the next slide, let's look at some of the change story. There's a business change story saying, hey, for various reasons, we're no longer going to have administrative staff at the receptionist desk on the 3rd floor at our Soho office. And then you can further build upon that business reason for change, right? And say, and prepare the 3rd floor staff to understand the change by saying, we know you have visitors and deliveries. You'll be expected to prepare your visitors and guests by telling them, giving them instructions to wait in the lobby and use the phone provided in the lobby to reach you. And you should be prepared to come out and greet them, that sort of thing. Then visitors and guests, they might not need to understand the business reason or any of that, but they need to be prepared when they walk in the building somehow to know that there's a phone there and they can contact the person they're meeting. And same with deliveries. They need to know where to put a delivery and how to get a signature and use the phone tree. So you can see the change story has a core story to it, and then it needs to be adapted for the various audiences. So the next thing you need to do is you need to plan for change. And some of the things here, the biggest thing I emphasize here is you need to set realistic expectations for people, and you need to make sure you manage change-related risks. A couple of tools afterwards is a communications kind of plan, a small one, and a example training plan to think about. Some planning guidelines, if anything, in the planning section. Hopefully this will make a lot of sense to you. When making plans, at a minimum, realize people need to know a change is coming. They need to know what the change is and what isn't changing, let's say. When is it going to happen? You know, why are you doing it? And how are they going to be ready for it? So this list is important, kind of helps you understand the who, what, where, when, and how of a change. So that's if you're planning. If you're experiencing change, someone ought to be able to answer these questions for you, right? You need to reach out to people who are engaging, who are talking about implementing change, and start asking some questions as well. You should know this information. For communications, there's a couple of things to keep front and center. Is you need to be two-way feedback, two-way communications. Who delivers the message is important. And there's lots of ways to engage people other than just emails and announcements. There's road shows and focus groups, attending meetings, conducting surveys, and information sessions. There's lots of things you can do. With training, it's important they understand how people's work will change and ensure that they can successfully perform that work. You need to explore that. I put a few things on the slide. Luckily, we've got teams like the staff ed and development team that can guide you on real and effective training plans. And in fact, they're the team I go to and I recommend for training efforts. That was a shameless plug, not required by SED, but a real partnership with that team. Going to the next slide about a no receptionist, there's some communication that had to happen. They needed to provide everyone with a way to provide feedback on the change. There were some announcements made in this order where managers were prepped first, then the 3rd floor was told about it. They were the media audience impacted by the change, and then the whole organization found out. If we'd done those announcements in the reverse order, people would have been surprised. Supporting and signage materials, that's another form of communication. The training, well, the inter-office mail team had a new responsibility now, which was the sort the previous day's delivery and mail in the morning, and they needed to be trained, and there needed to be instructions for delivery folks and guests and whoever showed up to be able to use that phone in the lobby to reach who they needed to reach. And looking at time, so I'm kind of going a little quicker. Managing change, you need to make sure that you're actually tracking what you're doing, and that way you'll be able to see it in a meaningful way. Let's jump into one of the main tools, which is a schedule. Also, you need to manage feedback. It's no use having people give you feedback if you never answer them or don't follow up or apply that feedback in a meaningful way. An OCM schedule needs to be sure you've got the right people doing things in the right order at the right time. So remember we said we told the managers first, then we told the people who were impacted directly before we told the whole organization. You'll see that on the next slide. But whatever you do with your OCM engagements and working and engaging people and helping them is you need to be consistent, and whatever you do needs to be meaningful. So the slide where it says no receptionist OCM schedule, that's kind of a sample of, we drafted things and we got sign off and we issued this announcement. And then a number of days later, we got feedback, and then we issued the next announcement. And while we were doing that, we were preparing signage, that sort of thing. The last thing that you need to make sure you do is when you transition, you're setting it up so that you can sustain the change. Are people ready? What takes place when and after the change takes place? You want to make sure that's happening, and that there's focus still on the people. OCM and feedback continues. So the tool that will be provided is like a transition checklist. So some of the things aligned with that is content in place? Are communications ready to go? The people who are going to own this after you make the change in place, are they ready? Is there any data or security or any process changes that will be ending alongside this change? So in other words, related activities are all the supporting communications and actions scheduled to make sure it happens in a streamlined way. So let's look at our no receptionist story. They made sure that there was awareness about the change and the people were notified in a proper order. They made sure the inter-office team was trained to sort and do the mails as required. They made sure that there was signage posted and the lobby phone and instructions were installed. And again, they made sure that everyone was reminded, as of this day, this change is in place. So I want to leave time for questions. In summary, the no receptionist story. How did it go? Actually, overall, it went well. I have to say that this was a culture of independence, so it made sense. Did it go smoothly? And was there any adjustments to be made? No, there were adjustments. There were people, deliveries and guests, as you can imagine, messengers in New York City just want to drop it off and leave. And guests would wander in and they would reach out to the people who sat closest to this desk. So there ended up being some new office partitions and reconfiguration of the space to kind of shield people. So it really drove more people to the phone. They redid the signage, they improved the instructions, but overall it was lasting and went well enough. They did it there were 11 offices and they did it at a few more of the offices. So as a reminder here, if you're leading change, make sure you understand the change. What is changing and who does it impact and how? You need to plan and prepare those people for the change, always based on what you know. So as your understanding of change richens, kind of grows, you'll need to make sure that whatever plans you have in place for people are just similarly adjusting. You also need to manage that change. You need to be out there making sure people are aware, getting them trained, whatever it takes so that they can sustain the change and perform the change once it's made. A couple of things you never forget, really, is resistance is real. It's just not going to go away on its own. You need to address it. And that goes back to OCM can be challenging at times because it's difficult conversations, but I'm always very thankful, and I know others have been as well, that someone's willing to have a difficult conversation to make sure that if we are going to change and it's going to be a challenge perhaps, that at least we feel like we're in it together and we're as prepared as possible. Individuals need to decide to adopt changes, and that it's organizations only change individuals at a time. So if you don't put a lot of effort into OCM, people will be slow to make a change, which means organizationally you're not likely to succeed with your change, and you're not likely to sustain it, the little perhaps that you did make. It's just a researched fact. It's very true. And your chances increase over and over and over again the more you engage people with change. And that's not just talking at them, that's talking with them, but also engaging them and leveraging people, working with subject matter expertise and understanding what change looks like to someone, because you might have been making assumptions that, and you end up learning that, wow, there's other related practices we're going to impact. So you'll be learning from the people involved in the change. Now, if you're experiencing change, what do you need to know? Here's that list of reminders. Like, you need to know what is and isn't changing. Why? Plus, why is it happening? What's the reason for this? When will it happen? How are you going to be impacted by that change? How are you going to prepare for that change? And how will you be successful? These are questions you can ask other people and make sure they're thinking about what it means for you as an end user impacted by the change. Also, be aware of your own resistance and your own motivations with change. So, because if you're aware of that, you might ask other questions. You might also be an influential person that can help others struggling with change to help people translate the change into meaningful terms for people. Because oftentimes we have people very well intentioned trying to say, hey, here's what's changing, but they really don't know how to say it to the different groups of people. And if you're someone who's understanding that and could step in and help translate that change, you're helping everybody, not only yourself, but the people who want a successful change and are charged to implement it, and the people who are going to be affected by that change. So that's another way of looking at how will you engage. So I apologize for needing to be on the phone today. It's just a kind of a Zoom situation. I'm open to any questions, and you can always follow up with me. I'll take the time to answer your questions, and if you've joined today, you clearly care, and don't worry about reaching out to me directly. Thank you.
So we're going to spend some time. We have some time to ask Lynn some questions, and I welcome you to queue those up in the chat. I do have one ready from the audience to go. And that one, let me paste that into the public chat. You did speak a lot about change management, Lynn. You also have a lot of experience in project management and process design engineering. What is the difference between project management and change management? That's our first
That's
question.
great. That's a wonderful question. And that's why I list the various like certifications that I have, is because to me, I've always professionally sat on the side of the people side of business, let's say. And even though I'm technically in the IT department, I'm very much focused on the people side of IT. So for me, change management is a great space for me to be in, because when I run projects, of course, there's a people side where we're thinking about who's involved with the change. Project management, however, focuses a lot also on the logistical side of change. So we've got scope and budget and the deliverables. And if it's technical, there's the technical aspect of it. And of course, with the project, you have your sponsor and your stakeholder and your team. And you want to make sure when you implement your project that it's a success and that people use whatever you put in place, right? For me, change management as a practice it's all focused on people. And it is, to me, a companion element for any type of work, whether you're conducting, I'm a green belt, black belt, and a certified process design engineer, whether I'm doing process work, whether I'm doing project management work, running a program, running a service, I do all of those things. There's a people side of everything. Change management helps me say, look, whatever the outcome is I'm trying to achieve, I am relying on people to either use it, one, make it happen, but also use it or benefit from it in some way. People are always part of the equation. And so the more you integrate change management or the people side of change into your project or process or other work in a way that's focused on people adopting, people being ready for it to be able to succeed and with whatever you're putting in place, that is really important because it only increases the success you'll have. I worked on a lot of projects I feel were very successful, but I know before I learned as much as I learned about change management that how much more successful they could have been, how much more prepared people could have been. I could have gotten them more involved. The solutions could have been richer, the outcomes easier in that. So I don't know if I answered your question, but to me, it's always a supporting branch, not different from, but the more you incorporate it and integrate it in strategic ways, and that's also why I laid it out for change management. If you plan, if you understand it, so you're initiating something, and then you plan for it and you manage it and maybe you transition it or close it out. For people conducting work, projects, that might feel familiar. You're going to initiate it, you're going to plan for it, you're gonna manage it and close it out. And people will always see something different, and there might be changes or be impacted by a change as you come along. So there's not a waterfall approach to this. You need to be agile and respond and work with people the same way you plan and adjust your project. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Lynn. I think that this topic of change management is still kind of a new one. And so the second question that we have time for, and this is the last question we have time for, is I think trying to still capture what is change management, where can I recognize it? So where has a university been really successful with change management? I am not sure I recognize where change management has been applied. Can you share some examples? And I might add to this question, no, if maybe we can recognize it by seeing where it wasn't applied, but I'll just leave it at that. Where has the university been really successful with change management? Where can they recognize where it's been applied?
Right. Okay. And cut me off, Linda, if there's not enough time. One of the things I can do also is write a bit more, and I can send it to Linda so that you can get a more rich answer to this to send to the participants on this call. Essentially, with enterprise system renewal, there have been a lot of projects, and not everybody is always aware of the portfolio of projects. Sometimes enterprise system renewal gets aligned with one specific project or another. The projects were all given, most of them were given some change management structure to integrate into the projects. And it was kind of left up to the projects themselves as to how they incorporate the change management. We all got better, both the ESR program and the projects, as we went along and learned from change management. So let me give you a good example. I always like to talk about the Koali implementations. I thought they were handled. There was 3, by the way. Well, actually, there were 4, but the 3 I'm focused on are in the greatest use. There was Koali Research, Koali Conflict of Interest, and Koali IRB. I consider all 3 of them to having been very successful from a change management perspective, in that there was a lot of focus on making sure there was awareness with their specific audiences. There was training that was role-based, and people were prepared for that. There was also, I know Koali IRB did a lot of work working with some select audiences to make sure a few steps people had to take with security, that there were layers and layers of people and documentation and resources to help people make sure they got past those first few steps. And those implementations focused a lot on change management. All of the ESR projects have had change management as a part of what they have done. They've just executed them differently. And in all honesty, with all well-intended efforts, there've been very well-intended efforts. One thing I think you might resonate to anyone who's aware of the student information system is that on the journey they've been going forth with change, one thing they've done is they've been very transparent, and they've provided updates via news. They've routinely worked with executives and governance. They've done a lot to make sure they're moving forward, and they're ready to share information as needed. And the point here is that they've gone through some requests for proposals, and rather than not say anything about student information systems whatsoever and privately go on behind the scenes, they let people know there's a project that's happening, and there's work going on to understand what happens in our current state for us to develop a future state. So they've worked with SMEs, and they've helped us understand our requirements so that we can then approach vendors. And you hear the story associated with the student information system, and people might not think that that's OCM, but it is. It's dedicated team members that work with the project leadership and service owner leadership who come together and say, you know, what do we need to know to get from a current state to a future state? And as we're in this initial stages of our project, trying to determine what systems we'll put in place and when we'll start doing that, what do people need to know? So organizational change management, another way to think of it is potentially an outgrowth of what should happen as part of a really good project, as part of really good process improvement, as part of a really good program or a really good service. In that if you are making a change, the people who need to know about the change know about it, and they're never all going to be impacted the same way. So they know about it to the level they need to know, right? A timekeeper needed to know a lot more about a change with eco time than someone entering time, for instance. So think of it more as deliberate work that puts people first and makes sure there's planning for success for people to adopt and succeed at a change that you're trying to implement. That's really what OCM is, hopefully. Yeah,
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to have you. And we know that you'll be coming back towards the fall, end of summer too. And we're excited that you were here. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us live. And in closing, I want to remind everyone that the UC San Diego Learning Boost is here for you to learn, to give you a small but mighty learning boost. It's also here for you to leverage, to inspire you to leverage inspiration into bite-sized risk-taking, and to lead the way towards richer, more meaningful conversations. Thank you for joining us here today. I'll play our title slide out, and thank you and have a great week. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.